So I'm Lily, and I work at, well, I'm a PhD student at the University of Paris, and I'm in my third year, and this is going to be a presentation of my PhD research. So it's in a university context. That's just to kind of situate everything. So my PhD studies aim is to look at the ways in which integrating students' usual informal practices in English into the more formal context of an online course can foster the application of various descriptors which were added to the Common European Framework Reference for Languages' new companion volume, which was published in 2018. And I'm focusing mainly on the mediation competence and on online interaction skills, which are the two main additions to this companion volume. And to do this, we're looking at how using profession-based fiction as the main learning material is relevant in language teaching, especially for languages for specific purposes. And so if we define profession-based fiction, it's basically any fiction where the story's general framework is around a professional field, but it's actually also the main source of the plot. So we're using films, but profession-based fiction could also be novels, for example. And in our case, it's films. So I'm going to just give a quick presentation of the project, a few key concepts, present how the course works, and give a few examples of activities and tasks, and then talk about data collection, analysis, and a few results. But that's still ongoing, so I can't go into too much detail on that. So the project actually came about when I was working on creating the course as part of a job, and it was just as the companion volume was being published in 2018. And I was already working on taking the Common European Framework into account. And then I took an interest in how these new editions of the mediation competence and online interaction skills could also be integrated and applied. And then I noticed that in all studies around profession-based fiction for teaching English or teaching languages, the notion of mediation was actually already very present in research. So I thought, well, how can we go full circle with this and apply it in this course? So we claim that by offering tasks which are as action-oriented as possible. So when I say action-oriented, I mean what the Common European Framework would define as real-life, authentic, significant tasks for students. When these tasks are combined with an online environment and the integration of students' informal practices, we claim that this would allow for the existence of mediation and the use of online interaction competences. And we also claim that specifically by using profession-based fiction as a main learning material, this would foster the occurrence of these different competencies as they are described in the Common European Framework's companion volume. So we're focusing mainly on the 2018 addition to the framework. So the idea is that students become the knowledge holders and the source of the knowledge. And this is what Schofield calls meiotics mediation. So it means that the students are the ones who bring the content, they're the ones who explain the content. And we talk about expert learners when regarding the students because we consider they could be seen as budding experts for three main reasons. So firstly, because of their knowledge of the field, so they're studying economics and the films reflect this professional field. Because of their prior experience and knowledge linked to the course's content, again, because they're studying economics, and also because of their familiarity towards the practices which are integrated into the course. So these are the three reasons why we would say that the students can be put in a position of being an expert. And the two main informal practices that we're talking about, so like I said, are watching films in their original version, which is in informal learning studies seen as one of the main practices. And in our courses is translated by using this profession-based fiction in film form as a learning material. And the other informal practice is online interaction between students, which is translated in our course by discussions via the Learning Management System Moodle's forum. So that the course is entirely distance. So the students there's no face-to-face classes at all within this course. And this is particularly important because if we look at the CEFR in 2001, the words online and internet are close to absent. They appear twice and 3 times respectively. Whereas in the companion volume, which was published in 2018, they appear 291 and 39 times respectively. So the whole online aspect is central really to, if we want to look at how the the companion volume applies, this the online aspect is really key. So to verify our hypothesis, we conducted a teaching experiment during the second semester of the 2019 to 2020 academic year with first year economics and management students at the University of Paris. And by doing this, we're studying how these new descriptors apply by creating two different versions of the course where the tasks are slightly different. And we are claiming that by offering more action-oriented tasks in one version of the course, so in the experimental group, we're trying to observe which differences this leads to in terms of mediation between students compared to the control group's version of the course. And we're also looking at when these tasks will require that students put themselves in the position of an expert learner, what we call an expert learner. So that can be, for example, linking to their prior knowledge or to their prior experiences, directly referring to the out-of-class practices to illustrate a point. When this is encouraged by the tasks, we're looking at whether what the students are doing looks like and matches the competencies that are described in the companion volume. So I'm just going to quickly go through the key concepts of this study. So obviously we have the action-oriented approach and anything that's linked to a task and the task framework for task-based language teaching. And also student-centered learning, learner-centeredness is relevant because we are integrating and valuing students' usual activities in English. Obviously, we're also taking into account the implementation of the action-oriented approach in an online environment. So these two fields have been linked in research in recent years. And we also have relevant sociology theories linked to that, like communities of practice or the idea of affinity spaces. We're also taking into account all studies on computer-assisted language learning and its benefits, benefits of computer-mediated communication, particularly when it's asynchronous, because that's what it is in our course. It's asynchronous, as I'll mention in a minute. Studies on our student audience are also relevant. So this millennium students, I mean, obviously it's open to debate, but this millennium students are said to be good digital language learners. They, according to Tarula in 2016, they're confident, open-minded, have new lifestyles based on sharing, and this would make them apparently uninhibited and more likely to interact. So this are things that we take into account. And also, the action-oriented approach, as it's described in the CEFR, is adapted to these students because one of the ideas of the framework is also to prepare students for international mobility, contact with with citizens of other languages. So it's relevant to our study. Because we are focusing on the learner and the learner's practices, all studies linked to informal learning are relevant. So Socket called this online informal learning of English, but you'll find other acronyms and other names for this in research. And this refers to all the activities done during the learner's spare time, which involve the language. And this makes the idea of trends in language learning quite relevant because there's many recent studies which have shown the potential for language learning through these informal practices. And the studies do actually mention watching films in English, reading and interacting online, which are all things that we have included in our course. And we're also interested in the kind of blurred line between formal and informal, because we're including leisure activities into a course which is in an academic context. So the main aim really is to obtain their degree, but the course is also happening out of class because it's distance. So the whole formal informal line is a bit blurred. We're also interested in the idea of authenticity, and the idea that by requiring students to refer to their real out-of-class activities, we can encourage real-life tasks which have a larger aim than just the foreign language class, which are preparing students for their future world of work and hopefully reduce the gap, which is often noticed between formal learning of English in France and students' real personal use of the language outside of class. And hopefully this can have a significant impact on motivation. And as we mentioned before, so we have all studies on FASP. So FASP is Profession-Based Fiction, it's the French acronym. And all studies linked to this as a learning material, and especially for learners of other disciplines, so non-specialists of English. And profession-based fiction is actually very interesting because it's at the crossroads between students' out-of-class practices, so the idea of watching films in English, and a professional reality that they may find out about and know about after their studies. And as we said before, FASP, profession-based fiction, in research is actually considered a mediation tool. So if we understand mediation as a synonym of representation, we could say that profession-based fiction is a linguistic mediation tool because it represents the vocabulary and the specialized discourse from the field in a context of the film, and also a cultural mediation tool because it shows the field's work culture or corporate culture, for example. So as well as being one of the CEFR's companion volume's main additions, the idea of mediation seems to naturally arise from this profession-based fiction. And in fact, most of the studies so far which have been released on the idea of mediation in language teaching and the use of the action-oriented approach online using mediation are from before the companion volume was published. So we're hoping that this study will contribute to what hides behind this vaguish word and how it can be applied to a language course. So a few key numbers for the course. So it was followed by 124 students. So that's half of the first year cohort, as the other half were following a different course. There were 9 weekly modules, which represented the equivalent to what the students would have had if it were a face-to-face class. They worked on 3 different films for over 3 weeks each. And the course is in asynchronous format. So the module is posted on the Monday morning and students have until the Sunday evening to complete it. Oops, sorry. And each module has a common structure. So that's one or several film extracts, sometimes other video material, oral comprehension based on the extracts, a production task, which is posted and shared on publicly on the forum, and then an activity based on the week's vocabulary. And we always have optional and fun links, which is another way of deliberately integrating students' informal practices into the course. So we've already mentioned some of the benefits. So the fact that the profession-based fiction can represent the language and the culture in a professional field. And the 3 films that we chose, so Margin Call, The Wizard of Lies, and Rogue Trader, were chosen because of how they allow for ethically acute questions to be asked. So the common thread for the course came after having read an article by Werner, which explained how the film Margin Call, so our first film, could be used to study techniques of neutralization, so a sociology concept. And so then the question of moral dilemmas, ethical issues, and behavior in the workplace came to be the basis of our course, and this helped us to select the 2 other films, which are also profession-based fiction from a similar field, so that's finance and the world of banking. So if we look at the titles of our 9 weekly modules, they're all in question form, which helps to reflect this, the idea of these ethically acute or socially acute questions, which is what Raymond, for example, calls them. And according to these studies, asking these questions would have a positive impact on language production because students are thinking about something other than the language, and this would lead to more risk-taking and less anxiety from learners. And it's also important to point out that questioning ethics is central to the professional field of finance and banking. And so by making students face the problems or dilemmas or pressure that's experienced by the characters in a controlled way via real life tasks, we're hoping to prepare them for the world of work and make them think about these potential problems in a critical way. So the tasks that we used in our course, the task creation is based on task main characteristics of tasks in research. So for example, the importance of having information or an opinion gap, which makes interaction necessary, and also the idea of interdisciplinary skills. So as we said, preparing students for the world of work. So the tasks required online research, creating a PowerPoint for a meeting, using an online platform, creating audio recordings, writing structured texts online, and adapting them to the receiver, for example. And our tasks took into account different descriptors from the companion volume regarding mediation. So they seem a bit vague when you see them like this. You think, okay, what does that mean? But really, that's one of the problems with the framework. It can seem a bit vague, and then in fact it's very simple. So we have things here like, for example, expressing a personal response to creative texts and analysis and criticism of creative texts. So the CEFR clearly states that text can also be a play or a film, for example. So we're using the word text here, but in our case, it's the films that we're using. And so this can be things like summarizing the main points, collating information from different sources and adapting it to an intended audience, summarizing things on a subject related to the student's field of interest and specialization. So that's a B2 descriptor, and that matches our course because the students are talking about their specialization, their studies, something related to the field of their studies, should I say. And then we have things like explaining what the student liked, what interested him or her about the work, characters that they identified with, relating the aspects of the work to their own experience. And then also things like comparing the themes, the characters, giving a reasoned opinion, and explaining how the different works differ in their treatment of the same theme. So in fact, they're very simple things, but this is what mediation is according to the companion volume. We also have the idea of mediating concepts, which again sounds a bit vague, but it refers to the process of facilitating access to concepts and knowledge for others. And according to the companion volume, this happens when the learner is given the official or unofficial role of a facilitator. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in our course. So we're trying to give learners the role of expert learner as they are budding expert in their field, and because the tasks are linked to their own informal online practices, which they're said to be familiar with. And the third one is mediation strategies. So mainly the idea of linking to previous knowledge and linking to their own experience as a learner. And like we said before, Shapley calls this the idea of students explaining the content themselves. She calls this maietics mediation. So if we look at a couple of examples of tasks, and it looks a bit messy, but I've deliberately zoomed in on certain terms. So the idea is not to read everything. On the left, we have, for example, something which was a personality quiz. So here the students are encouraged to compare themselves to, or not compare themselves, identify with characters, explain why they're identifying themselves with those characters. And then on the right, we have a written production in which students have to consider both sides of an issue, synthesize information from different sources, and develop other people's ideas. So these are all descriptors from the mediation competence, which have been integrated into the task design. Here we have a vocabulary activity in which students have to illustrate different ways of lying. So that was one of the weekly modules. And the idea here is to link it to previous knowledge by referring to their own informal practices. So link this to something you've seen online, and that's mediation, because that's a mediation strategy. And this was the final task, which was a summary of the whole course and combined written and oral production. And the idea was to prepare students for their potential working field, so presenting and training colleagues. And again, we have the idea of making knowledge clearer to others, comparing different works and their themes and their characters, and relating the events to their own experience, again, and their own emotions. So again, these are all mediation descriptors. And finally, we have the other main edition of the companion volume, which is essential to our course, which is online interaction. So here are two examples of descriptors for this. So the idea of being able to engage in online exchanges and link contributions to previous ones and participate actively as well. So that's all that is integrated into our course. So we have two versions of the course, one where the tasks are a lot more what the CEFR would consider action-oriented, and one where they are less so. And then we collected data from both versions of the course, which were followed by half and half of these students, so 64 and 65, that's something like that, 60-60. So questionnaires, interviews, and forum posts. So the research is according to a mixed method, and it's essentially based on students' personal representations, impressions. So there's no before and after task to evaluate linguistic progress. It's based on personal representations. So we have quantitative data through via two questionnaires, which were filled in by students at the beginning and at the end of the semester, to find out about their representations of their own learning and of the course's content. And then we have a more in-depth and complementary understanding with semi-structured interviews, which were done with half of the students from each version of the course. And then we looked at forum posts, and we're looking for mediation occurrences according to the CEFR descriptors. So it's mainly content analysis. So we have the quantitative analysis from the questionnaires, which kind of gives us a bigger picture with numbers. And we also have open questions in the questionnaire. And this allows us to cross-reference the data from the questionnaires with the interview answers and with how students posted and interacted on the forum. And the idea is to we're looking for patterns in the students' answers based on our research questions. And then on the forum, we're looking for occurrences of mediation and comparing them to the descriptors in the CEFR's companion volume to see if it matches what is being described. So this data is compared between both versions of the course, and this will hopefully allow us to draw conclusions on the applicability of the companion volume descriptors, how different this applicability is between the control group and the experimental group, whose tasks are closer to what the CEFR would consider action-oriented and authentic tasks. So far, the descriptive statistics from our questionnaires have confirmed a correlation between the resources, the activities that we've offered, and students' own informal practices. That's what they have said. And students' answers regarding sharing their experience, their opinion on a work, and the tendency to identify with characters do also suggest that the students in the experiment group are more inclined and more prone to mediation, and that this is fostered by our task and also fostered by the use of profession-based fiction. So if we look at this graph, so version 1 of the course is the control group, and version 2 is our experimental group. If we look here overall, students in the version of the course with more action-oriented tasks appreciated the forum's public aspect and interaction opportunities more, so more strongly agreed with liking, leaving comments, for example, and receiving them. Here again, we can see that more students in the same version, so in version 2 of the course, thanks to the tasks, did indeed express practice in mediation, which includes, for example, referring and linking to previous knowledge and learning from classmates and teaching classmates. Same here, the tasks in version 2 of the course seem to have had an effect on mediation between students. So more students claim to have been able to refer to personal knowledge and experience and share it with their peers. And in terms of linguistic and cultural skills, the accent on the mediation competence in version 2 meant that students had more opportunity to identify with characters and think about the ethically and socially acute questions, and therefore question the professional field in a more critical manner. And more students in this version felt that they had learnt about work culture and specific vocabulary from the field. And then I've got just a couple of examples of posts from the forum. So again, I've zoomed in on a few things. So some examples of mediation. This analysis is still ongoing, obviously. So students do show mediating concept skills. They're making knowledge accessible to their peers, and they're also showing mediating text skills. They're collating information from different sources, giving a personal reaction to a work with concrete examples and arguments. And I have another example here. So by integrating students' own informal practices in English into the course's content and tasks, mediation seems to be fostered, as students can easily link what's been learnt to previous knowledge. So like here with the illustration of types of lie, and the student is using a YouTuber that she watches to illustrate the point. And we also have a couple of examples of mediation that were not necessarily deliberate. So they were not taking into account in task design. So for example, here helping others and recognizing misunderstandings and correcting them. So the teacher's intervention is actually minimized, and the students seem to be becoming the holders and the transmitters of the knowledge. And similarly here, another aspect of mediation, so it's stated as being a mediation descriptor in the companion volume, but it's not one that we had deliberately planned for in our task design, and that's the description or interpretation of visual data. So this naturally happened. So these past two examples show us that by using students' informal practices in task design, and by fostering this familiarity and using it, and by offering tasks which are more authentic to and significant to students, this mediation competence seems to naturally emerge. And it's not just because we as task designers have forced it via instructions, because these are elements of mediation that do appear, that these are elements that we can match to mediation descriptors in the companion volumes, but not ones that we had planned for in our task design. So if we go back to our research questions, we can conclude that so far our results show that the version of the course in which the tasks were closer to the action-oriented approach do foster and encourage mediation between students in terms of content and of interaction mode. That this mediation, as well as the online interaction aspect, closely match what the CEFR's companion volume describes, and that this mediation competence also stems from the fact that the course takes trends in language learning into account and integrates what's familiar to students. But we can also say that this stems from the integration of profession-based fiction with this student audience, as it creates a double familiarity. So students can be expert learners and knowledge holders because their informal practices are involved, and also because they can relate to what's happening to the characters in the fiction and relate it to their own experience. So this means that they can identify with the characters, and this brings them to think about moral and ethical issues in the world of banking more critically. And they can also use their prior knowledge from their studies in the finance and banking field. So there's this double familiarity going on, which puts them at ease and means that the tasks seem significant to them. So all this means that tasks in the experiment group seem to be more relevant to students. They see a point in them, and this is visible in the answers from students during the interviews that we're currently analysing. And if we had to offer one perspective from what we've seen so far in this study, it would be that this is applicable to other fields and to other languages. So the idea of using profession-based fiction to develop this mediation competence. We could say, for example, we could suggest, for example, using The Good Doctor for medical students, or The Good Fight for law students, or The Good Place for philosophy students, because there's a philosophy professor in The Good Place, or Mr. Robot in computer science. And again, it could be for other languages. So we could imagine this in French or in Spanish, with any film which represents a professional field, because with students who are studying that field, in order to create this familiarity and foster this mediation. So here are the references that I mainly mentioned orally, but there's a few that appeared on the screen. So the most important would be the framework's companion volume, and then we have a few references to do with using profession-based fiction for teaching languages for specific purposes, and the online informal learning of English. And that's it from me. So I'd be happy to, if you have any questions. Obviously I couldn't cover everything, but I'd be happy to hear anything you have to say.
If you'd like to unmute your mics and give a round of applause. Nice work. And we have time for 1 or 2 questions, I think.
I have a question. Can I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Lily. That was really good. And I'm all about using a movie and visual aids for like when I teach TOEFL or TOEIC or any other language, like English language, because it's easier, to me, it's like easier to grasp the attention. But my question is, since you mentioned the authenticity of the text, which includes movie, do you have any criteria when you choose which movies? Or because I mean, apparently one criteria is how, like, to what degree it's profession based. So it's more like a thematic, yeah. So but since all those movies you introduced us in this presentation were they are like all good and entertaining, fun to watch movies. So my question, sorry, I needed to so yeah, how do you like do you have anything to be concerned, like not to choose kind of criteria, like to avoid this type, or yeah, something like that?
Well, actually, I think it's quite the opposite, because when I was choosing, so they're first year students, they're 18, 19. And there were a few in one of the films, I think mainly in The Wizard of Lies, there's quite a lot of swearing. And so at first I thought, that's not very professional to have extracts where they're saying they're swearing. But then I thought, well, no, because that's authentic. Students are probably watching that on YouTube and they've heard swear words before. And so in fact, it's the opposite. I sort of used what was probably not appropriate and then thought, well, actually, no, that's what's going to make it authentic. If I choose really boring films, which even the last film, Rogue Trader, is actually from 1995. So it's getting a bit old for these students who weren't even born, most of them, when it came out. But that was chosen mainly because it was a UK film. So it was to also have a variety. So that's one of the other criteria. The first two films are American English and the last one's UK English. So just to have that variety of discourse as well. So that one's a bit older, but mainly the criteria was recent, how recent it was, how likely it was maybe the students had already seen them. So quite a lot of students said they'd already seen them, which made it more relevant to them as well as content. And yeah, not limited. I think I used what someone would usually avoid to actually choose the films. So for example, the swearing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. But if people want to discuss more, if you go back to the main room, there are other breakout rooms available.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.